but was it already doomed after just 5? Red Bull has finally confirmed what had been expected for several weeks, that Tsunoda will be replaced by Isack Hadjar in 2026. And it gets worse for Tsunoda, who has not only lost his dream Red Bull drive, but will be off the grid entirely. Liam Lawson has been picked to remain at Red Bull's second team Racing Bulls, alongside promoted rookie Arvid Lindblad. Tsunoda never had the ideal preparation for his Red Bull racing chance, given just 3 races into 2025 he was suddenly given the seat he'd been rejected for just a couple of months previously. He had had to rebound from the disappointment of being overlooked to replace Sergio Perez for 2025 and watching Lawson line up alongside Max Verstappen instead. But Tsunoda did recover well. He was fitter, in a good place mentally, determined to prove Red Bull wrong, and started the season very strongly in the second team, admittedly alongside a rookie in Hadjar. It was enough that when Lawson really struggled at Red Bull, the team decided on its shock early change and that Tsunoda was worth the punt. And given how much of a disappointment the season has generally been, it's easy to forget that Tsunoda's start at Red Bull was actually pretty good. Okay, he wasn't matching Verstappen in terms of high profile results or anything like it, but he was immediately more competitive than Lawson had been, and more or less at the level of Perez in the back end of last year. He scored points early, was reasonably quick in qualifying, and on an encouraging initial trajectory across his first 4 race weekends. But then it all went wrong with a crash at Imola in May that Tsunoda still regrets now at the end of the season. There have been flashes of promise for Tsunoda, and occasionally he has looked like the Verstappen teammate Red Bull needs him to be, certainly more than Lawson did, even if his chance was so limited, and also more than what Perez looked like at times in the second half of last season. But there's a limit to this positivity. Tsunoda only beat Verstappen in one single qualifying session all year, for the sprint in Qatar, and never looked like beating Max over a Grand Prix weekend. So he has fallen short of Perez's absolute peak, and his average deficit to Verstappen has been uninspiring. The occasional moments where Tsunoda has been almost as fast as Verstappen are what he and his camp have clung on to, especially as there have been times where Tsunoda has lagged behind on car specification. That has made direct comparisons with Verstappen tricky, but this is partly why the Imola crash is so significant. It killed any early momentum that Tsunoda had built and shredded his confidence. It was a silly error, as Red Bull had changed his car specification and setup for qualifying to give him the latest floor and bodywork, but Tsunoda attacked his first Q1 lap as though the car was the same. When he turned into the second chicane, the front was more positive than expected, the rear immediately broke loose and he crashed dramatically. It was unnecessary, avoidable, and bad for Tsunoda's confidence. For several races after that, Tsunoda seemed to be second-guessing his driving and unable to take the car close to the limit. But the other reason it was significant is because the supply of the new parts that were on the car Tsunoda crashed was scarce, so this began the sequence of him constantly lagging behind Verstappen on more than one upgrade. It made Red Bull hesitant to give him upgrades sooner, just in case he did crash, and so there was an imbalance in what each car was capable of and how they'd respond to certain setup changes. This then fed more of that negativity for Tsunoda because it led to weaker results, weaker performances, him chasing things and not being confident in the car. It was just before the summer break that, with a change of leadership in the team and Laurent Mekies assuming control, a conscious decision was made to give Tsunoda the latest upgrades as soon as they are available without compromising spares for Verstappen. That sparked an immediate upturn in form, but that's a long run from the end of May to the end of July, and it's no exaggeration to say it set Tsunoda back at least 2 months in terms of showing more of what he was capable of. What we've seen in the last few races has been a bit more like what Tsunoda was starting to build right at the start of his Red Bull stint. Was he doomed the moment he stuck his Red Bull in the fence at Imola? Not exactly, as there was plenty of time for him to get it back together and keep his seat if he'd done an absolutely mega job. He hasn't done that. So Imola might not have guaranteed Tsunoda would be a failure at Red Bull, but it is the single critical mistake that changed the trajectory of what followed, and it's the one big thing that Tsunoda regrets even now.
Today's video is brought to you by Rovo, your AI teammate from Atlassian. Rovo connects knowledge, people and workflows so teams can work smarter and move faster. It helps people find answers, make decisions and automate work securely and with context through search, chat, agents and studio. Rovo runs on the Teamwork Graph, Atlassian's intelligent layer that unifies data across all of your first and third-party apps so no knowledge gets left behind, and so you always get personalised AI insights from day one. And the best news? It's already built into Jira, Confluence and Jira Service Management paid subscriptions, so the power of Rovo is already at your fingertips. Know the feeling when AI turns from tool to teammate. If you Rovo, you know. Discover Rovo, AI that knows your business, powered by Atlassian. Get started at ROV, as in victory, o.com today.
Tsunoda too often looked at his best when Red Bull was having a difficult weekend. When the car was more competitive, Verstappen took a big step and Tsunoda couldn't go with him. It's the overall performance, the consistency, the execution, and the small details that make a big difference. Tsunoda was capable of being very fast, but was also guilty of being absolutely anonymous and going backwards in races. Austria, for example, was a particularly grand case of him having no pace and awful tyre management. He looked and sounded lost, with no answers. This is where Red Bull would expect Hadjar to have the upper hand. Hadjar has been very quick almost every single weekend in his rookie season, surprising even himself in that regard. The Racing Bulls is a much more compliant car than the Red Bull is. It's got a friendlier setup window, it doesn't bite in the way the Red Bull does, so there is no guarantee, as Tsunoda has found, that what you do in a Racing Bulls transfers into a Red Bull. But the key difference is that Hadjar has convinced Red Bull that he is simply quick enough for everything that usually hampers Verstappen's teammates to not be such a burden. He has the extra bit of pace that just makes everything that follows a little bit easier. At the very least, Red Bull would expect its second car to be regularly in Q3, scoring points every race and consistently being part of that lead group of cars, even if they are more often than not at the back of it. Ultimately, Tsunoda did this very little. We got a glimpse of it in the Qatar sprint race where he finished 5th, and if he had done that for most of the season, we suspect he would still be with the team for 2026. So why couldn't he? It's hard to pinpoint exactly what Tsunoda never quite got on top of, because his challenges would shift weekend to weekend. Sometimes he was limited by all-round grip, sometimes it was tyre management in races, sometimes he couldn't attack because he felt the rear was too unstable, the classic Red Bull problem. But sometimes he was actually just fine. And fine meant he was 2 or 3 tenths off Verstappen, plus a bit more if there was a car spec difference. Then the midfield is really tight, so he'd have a bad result on paper even though the pace was actually not terrible. It seems lazy to just summarise it as Tsunoda not being quite good enough in a very difficult situation, but that's about the extent of it. Tsunoda never felt that Red Bull wasn't doing enough to help him, as the team threw new parts at his car, especially in the second half of the season. And there's really not much of an indication that Tsunoda had a clear idea of what he needed but didn't have, and what could have helped him. Tsunoda's big opportunity has been his F1 downfall, because had he not been promoted to Red Bull, he'd have had a season in a very good Racing Bulls car that has often been the quickest car in the midfield. Instead, his options to get back on the grid will be a little bit more limited because his reputation has taken a knock and other teams have got their plans set. Red Bull now needs to make sure Tsunoda's exit starts a crucial reset of its troubled driver situation. Putting Hadjar in alongside Verstappen could work. Hadjar is clearly more highly regarded within Red Bull than Tsunoda ever really was, and is probably the fastest Red Bull junior since Verstappen came in a decade ago. He seems to be the most convincing in terms of the impact he's had internally at Red Bull, the speed that he's shown, the confidence, the whole package. That bodes well on the driver side, and there is also a big rule change next year. The cars are completely different. Yes, the methodologies carry over, and yes, there could be familiar traps for Red Bull to fall into if there are still limitations in terms of how it develops a car and what certain traits end up in the car as a result. But the optimism will still be that Hadjar will be a better driver and therefore be able to handle it better than Tsunoda would, and will be in from the start of a brand new set of rules so he can tune his driving of those cars specifically to the Red Bull. Hadjar will get the chance Tsunoda never got, a full pre-season and a long one as well, with lots of opportunities to drive across the 3 tests. He should be more prepared than any Verstappen teammate since Daniel Ricciardo. So there's a clean slate to start from here for Red Bull Racing, and for the second team these changes are a first step towards restocking the talent pipeline. Lindblad is good and has shown really strong glimpses of great potential. He impressed Red Bull with his speed in a Mexico FP1 appearance this year, for example, but he's also had a rocky F2 season. That championship is hard to judge, so Red Bull's decision follows a trend of, for example, Kimi Antonelli and Ollie Behrman being promoted into F1 without as much success in F2 as you'd expect a promoted F1 driver to have had. But look at what they've done. They've proven themselves absolutely worthy of being on the F1 grid, so Red Bull will be confident and optimistic that Lindblad's promotion will follow the same trend. Still, he's a bit of a wildcard. The hope will be that the stability afforded by Liam Lawson, who has rebuilt himself very well at the second team, can be a good reference for Lindblad as well as serve Racing Bull's competitive ambitions. Then Lindblad can ease his way in. He needs a good strong learning year, safe in the knowledge that his trajectory is set in the medium term. Ideally for Red Bull, Hadjar will work out well at the top team, Lindblad will work well at the second team, and there will be stability on the driver's side for at least 2 seasons, maybe even 3 seasons. If either of those things don't play out that way, Red Bull just restarts its dysfunctional cycle and will be scrambling for a stopgap solution somewhere in their driver lineup and being propped up by Verstappen's heroics again.